Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Lanterns of Light. Today, we have a very, very special guest with us. And I know I say that every time I begin an episode, we have a very, very special guest. It's because all the guests we bring on the show are very special. But today, we have Danyal Khan. And, before we get to, get to the actual topics that we're going to cover today, I do want to preface this by saying, I had the pleasure of working with Danyal for a brief moment of time. I've got the pleasure of knowing him for a bit longer. I do consider him a friend. I don't know if he considers me a friend, but hopefully he does, maybe.
Absolutely.
And I've got the pleasure of working with him in the community, so I've seen his work firsthand. And as we'll share in a moment, his experiences, he has a lot of experience in the Muslim community. And so hopefully this could benefit all of our listeners, students of knowledge, people who are just wanting to learn more about dynamics in the Muslim community. I think Danyal Khan is a perfect candidate to explain those dynamics to us. So thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And so to begin, we always try to give a little bit of educational background and how that ties into your work. So Danielle, your educational background includes a bachelor's of science in psychology, as well as a master's in social work, management and policy from Rutgers University. You also have a human services management certificate. Your experiences, mashallah, are wide. You've served as the executive director at the Islamic Association of Raleigh. You've served as the national director of Muslim Family Services at ICNA Relief USA. You've been a nonprofit. You are a nonprofit consultant, a personal development coach, operations manager at Visualis. Did I say that?
Visualize.
Visualize. Okay, Visualize. And currently, you are serving as the executive director of the Islamic Education Center of Pennsylvania, which is where our beloved instructor Sheikh Shinawi is as well. So that leads me to our first question. You have a degree in psychology and you have a master's in social work, right? And you don't really find a lot of people in the Muslim community working within the Muslim community with these skill sets, which is kind of shocking from one side, and also kind of it's shocking that not a lot more people have this, but you do possess these degrees. So do you think that the skills you learned you actually apply in your current work within the Muslim community?
Bismillah. Yes, absolutely. When I just to give you some context, when I started doing this work, I didn't want to ever run a masjid, be an executive director, didn't like management, didn't really like associate myself with management and, you know, all that stuff. I wanted to be a therapist and an illustrator. Like I wanted to draw children's books and I wanted to hear about people's feelings because I was doing that already, but I wasn't doing it professionally. And then I started studying psychology after doing like med school, pre-med for a little bit and realizing it's not for me. Um, and then it just subhanallah, like you plan and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. Like I started off in the therapy route and then gradually with different things that were happening in my life, I just transitioned into leading a team of social workers and therapists, and then working on strategies, then studying it, getting trained in it. Then my first, alhamdulillah, my first executive director role at IAR, and then now at ICPA. So it's not something I planned for, but the therapeutic skills come in a lot of handy. It comes in handy when I'm working with people in the masjid space in particular because we have very diverse masajids are very diverse. We don't really understand how diverse they are. Even a masjid that's like ethnically dominant, right, with one ethnicity, there's socioeconomic differences, there's age differences, there's differences in terms of education, there's difference in terms of if they're born and raised here, if they're from another country, right? So there's so much diversity, and then with it you have to be sensitive to that diversity when you're communicating with them. So the therapeutic background definitely helped. The That was not something I planned for. It just alhamdulillah worked out. The social work stuff, the macro nonprofit management stuff, yeah, I use that training uh, in my work daily, right? When it comes to working on strategic plans, working on OKRs, making sure that they all align with the mission and vision. If there isn't a mission and vision, to create that, doing needs assessments and stuff like that. So yeah.
So I will say on behalf of all of us, thank you for not pursuing the pre-med route. On one side, I think it would be hard to have you as an applicant to compete with, but on the other, I mean, nothing against the pre-meds, current pre-meds, but I do feel like as Muslims, we also need to start considering these really important roles that we need to occupy in our communities, such as social work, such as psychology, right, such as therapy. And I'm glad you went that route because it's something that's missing within the Muslim community. Would you agree to that, or would you say no? Like,
Yeah.
go ahead,
No.
go. Yeah.
No, there's a lot of gaps. It's not just management, right? Like I happen to fit the executive director roles today, but if you go to like schools and churches, they have social workers and therapists that they have on payroll. And I don't know any masjids that have that. If there's any masjid that exists, they usually contract it out with the therapist as a contractor with their private practice, but it's rarely the case that they employ someone on their own. And that was one of like the things that really motivated me into getting into the masjid space was like when I went to IAR, I had no intention of like taking the role. I was just interviewing because it's a long story, but I had a love-hate relationship with this kind of work. I did it because I knew it was needed, but my heart wasn't really in it for a long time. And I remember when I came to IER and I met the people there, I just saw so much potential. I'm like, oh my God, we have so much opportunity to, like there's the health and wellness committee, right? Like we have so much opportunity to like transform that, maybe hire our own social worker, our own therapist, right? We can refine the case management, which we did. Like we ended up promoting one of the staff members to a case manager and stuff like that. So it's a little unorthodox the way that I think, I guess, compared to what you would be used to in the masjid space. But it's a need, right? And I just seemed to fit the hole at the time.
And your journey has taken you across many leadership roles, from ICNA Relief to IAR, Islamic Association of Raleigh in North Carolina, to Islamic Education Center of Pennsylvania. How has this journey shaped your perspective on Islamic leadership and community building as you went from one stage to the next?
Well, it's definitely humbled me a lot. When I was a younger guy, like I would say in my teenage years, I was very critical of masajids. I was one of those people that kind of just lost all hope in masjids, like, oh, it's not gonna grow, very like pessimistic. Um, I helped Muslims, but I didn't really want to help masajids, right? I kind of didn't really believe in the institutions at the time. I was very young and immature. Um, and then when I slowly started getting into management and I got into management in the charity space, I saw a lot of hardworking people, but not the most competent people, if that makes sense, right? Like there were a lot of my peers who, what they had going for them was, mashallah, they put a lot of years in this work, but no formal training, no formal background, right? There was a lot of disconnect, right? Like the department that I was running, I eventually ended up running. When I came in, one of the first problems were this great group of managers. Like ikhlas was abundant. They were very selfless in their work, but they couldn't really understand or communicate or even like just effectively manage therapists and social workers because they didn't understand how complex the work was, right? And there was just that gap. And I was one of those, people on the ground doing the work too. I was not a manager at the time. And I happened to know one of the district managers and I gave my input like, hey, when your therapist is saying this, they actually mean this, right? Like, there's certain things we can't broadcast. You have to keep in mind like all these legalities, all these HIPAA issues, all these like confidentiality issues, right? It doesn't mean they're not doing work. Maybe you can measure their performance this way. Look into this instead of that, right? And it was just translating, right? And I felt for both. I felt for the therapist because I was training to be that, and I felt for the manager because that was my buddy, right? And that kind of just that kind of just humanized the management. And then as I started getting into it, I realized how little I knew and how much I had to learn, especially when I got into the masjid space. It humbled me quite a bit. I saw how judgmental people were towards boards and how everything that's wrong in the masjid's the board's problem. It's because the boards don't do a good job, yada yada yada. But then when I'm in the board meetings and I see that these people genuinely love and care for the community, they want to do what's best, right? They just maybe don't have the right tools, or maybe just don't know how to communicate effectively, or whatever their shortcomings were as a human being. There was that problem. Then when I got to meet imams and stuff like that, I understood how complex their work is, right? That there are some people who put them in a really big pedestal where like they will have an emotional breakdown if something ever happened to their imam, right? Where these people just want to sit down and talk about Star Wars with me, like. So to put it simply, like I started learning how complex this stuff is, and I changed my mentality from being judgmental, which I was a lot when I was younger, to being curious, right? Probing, asking questions, trying to understand, because if I'm going to serve them, and that's how I saw it. People saw me as serving the community. I was like, no, I'm serving the people who serve the community. I'm serving, like, the way I used to frame myself to my team, and I still do, is like, think about a theater, right? There are in Broadway, there's all these actors and actresses that they do their show, right? Everyone is looking at them, but people are not looking at the stage master, the people behind the scenes who are controlling the lights, who are controlling, the sound, who are putting the props in place, and the person who's like putting all that together, right? And that's what I saw myself as. I never wanted to be in the front. I didn't think it was my place to. I think the imam should always be there, right? But the imam needs those lights. They needs that environment to deliver, to perform, right? And the same thing applies to all the service providing staff, your youth directors, your counselors, your public speakers. They all need that support. But it starts with taking the time to understanding them, and not being like, oh, just dismissing it.
So kind of on that point, you described yourself as, I'm not serving the community, I'm serving the people who serve the community. And I think that's powerful, in your leadership positions, as you are running the operations of an institution, of an Islamic institution. And as you're running that, how do you balance the spiritual and the operational aspects of managing Islamic organizations like IAR, like Ignore Relief, or ICPA? Is it that do you just focus on the operational part, or do you say, like, look, no, that the spiritual part is the imam's responsibility and my part is the operational responsibility? Or do you feel like you have a duty that you also have a stake in managing both within the organization?
So one of the challenges about doing this kind of work, regardless of where you fit, whether you're in the service providing side, or you're on the operations side, or you're in the strategy side, doesn't matter if you're a volunteer or staff member. I think one of the first hits of reality that anyone gets is getting disillusioned of the experience, right? And that's a very tough one for people. Very tough one. When I actually interview people, like to hire them, I do this like shake up thing in the first interview where I just lay it flat. You're going to see the ugly side of the community. People are going to yell at you. You're going to, the people who you potentially look up to, you might not look up to anymore, right? You're going to see the ugly side of even the imam at times, because they're still a human being. They're going to make mistakes. You're probably coming to the masjid is going to feel like work. Are you okay with that? Right? And I would always like end it with like, but don't worry, you have a team who has gone through the same thing you're about to go through, and will support you, and will do whatever they can to make sure that we keep some of that experience good for you, right? And we respect your boundaries, right? But we cannot shield you from everything. Are you okay with it, right? I have lost some people because of that, because of interviewing that way. But I've also gained some very talented people who are ready. Like, no, I'm ready. I'm ready to serve, right? So just speaking from my experience, yeah, ever since I started doing this work, it's been hard. It's been hard to maintain my spirituality and that experience, right? My personal studies, my personal practice, my personal feel, right, that I would get going to the masjid. Ramadan became work, right? It was a heavy fundraising season. If you're working the charity nonprofits, you guys probably know that you're going around every masjid tabling, right? You don't even have time to do tarawih, right? When I used before I started doing this work, I used to do i'tikaf 10 days every Ramadan for as long as I can remember. And the first year and ever since, I have not done it. And it hurts. Like at times, it really hurts me. I look at pictures from when I was younger, when I used to do it, and I'm like, man, I used to get such a spiritual high, right? But the ways that I've learned to combat that is just establishing my boundaries. Like one thing that I do that's probably not as common for people who do masjid work is I pray Fajr and Isha at home. I don't pray it at the masjid, which is like the opposite of what people tell you to do, right? You should pray Fajr and Isha at the masjid. And usually when you do this kind of work, you expect those people to be praying at the masjid 5 times a day. But the spirituality high, like the spiritual experience that I get now, praying Isha with my son in my bedroom with the lights dimmed, I can't get at the masjid anymore. And to me, that's more valuable, right? Because I need to connect, I need to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And not be thinking about work. Like my khushu', forget about it, right? Like after Isha is done, I'm worried about who's going to reach out to me for an emergency or something that happened, right? But at home, I don't have to worry about that. So that's just like one example. You have to figure out and create your boundaries, take the time to experience it, and be prepared that it will dip, because unfortunately, just like anything, right? They say, what's that saying? It's like never wish to meet your heroes or something like that, right? It's really real, because once you start doing this work, you do start seeing a side of people that you wish you didn't see. But it's okay, because that's also a part of the amana, right? It's also part of the trust and the responsibility.
And I appreciate that you mentioned this aspect of, it's the Muslim community and you're at the masjid, but at some level it is work, right?
Yeah.
And you have to somewhat separate work from, you going to the masjid as a worshiper rather than you going as a worker. And may Allah bless you for both, right? Like you were mentioning about the itikaf, the last 10 nights, right? Even if you can't do that, but if you're not able to do that because you're serving the community, may Allah give you that reward and more, right? I mean, so you've worked in Islamic management teams and organizations, and you've also worked in non-religious organizations, right? So how would you describe working between the two? Would you what are some of the similarities you experienced, some of the differences you experienced while working in secular versus Islamic management teams?
It's a good question. So the differences are actually starting to decrease, surprisingly. And it's because of this new wave of management, right? When people usually think about management, they think about the General Motors time, back when capitalism was at its peak and they started experimenting with how can you squeeze the most out of human beings, right? Changing significantly. Oh, I think my camera just switched. Can you still see me? Oh, and I think I lost you. I lost you too. Can you hear me too? I can't hear you though.
Oh wait, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Perfect. Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, no, you're good. What was the question again?
No,
You're probably gonna have to. You're
no
probably gonna have
worries.
to cut this one off.
No worries. Alhamdulillah. No, by the way, I can still see you. We're all good.
Okay.
Yeah. So no, the question was just comparing and contrasting between working in a non-religious management team like secular teams versus like Islamic management teams. What did you
Yeah.
feel is similar and different?
So the main difference are, and I usually tell this. So my personal model for management in the Muslim spaces, or just in service, is to serve with ihsan and ikhlas, serve with excellence and sincerity. I try to write it on any board. It's on when I was working at IR, we put it on our team cards actually, on the back of it. That's my motto. I like to leave that imprint everywhere. In the Muslim space, I see a lot of ikhlas. I see a lot of sincerity. People are very selfless, first in the front, right? Last to eat, putting their needs last. It's beautiful. But I have seen trends wise, not so much ihsan, right? And it's hard to measure what ihsan is, right? But if we had to measure ihsan in terms of consumption and contribution, then in terms of contribution, making sure that you show up on time, making sure that you deliver on what you promise. You don't make excuses. And this is the controversial part that people disagree with me quite a bit. But I'm very strong in this point of view that it doesn't matter to me if you're an employee or if you're a volunteer. If you take on a leadership role, board, committee chair, anything like that, you need to treat it like a job, right? Because that's an amana, that's a responsibility that you have been given by your community. They trust you to deliver. And if you're not able to deliver, it is your responsibility to communicate that proactively. But in the masjid space, we don't see that. In reality, what we see is people take on the roles, they either get burnt out, they can't deliver, but because we're worried about hurting their feelings, we keep them in the role and they delay the work. And that affects everyone, right? And it's just not right. It's not fair to the community. So you see the opposite problem in the corporate space. Everyone is trying to one up, try to impress, try to push themselves. I can keep going. I can do another hour. I can do overtime. I can do this. But how much of it's sincere? I talk to like my friends who are in management level like roles in corporate America, and they're usually telling me is like, no, I don't know who's my friend. Like I really don't know. And when I'm socializing, it's not genuine. But for me, when I'm socializing with people at the masjid, it's genuine. When they are asking me how's my family doing, there's no ulterior motive. I know they genuinely are asking how's my family. You know, if they didn't see me for Isha, it's not to point fingers at me. It's like, hey, like, are you okay? Is everything okay? Right? So there's like that flip, which I something I saw like day one. I was like, Subhanallah, this is incredible. So I'm trying to change that, right? Some other things that I noticed is when it comes to the corporate space, though, they're starting to introduce it now. What I like about like corporate, I guess if you want to call it that, there's probably some better terms out there, but if we're talking about for-profit businesses, they really know how to brand and package things, right? So they're doing a really good job branding and packaging emotional intelligence, starting with your why. Like Simon Sinek, I love this guy. He's actually one of the main guys who, like, his work really got me into thinking I could potentially do management because he talks about the servant leadership mindset. He's completely against the General Motors version of management and the Jack Welch's time. He talks more about starting with your why, which is something that Muslim nonprofits do. Like one of the foundations of our work is, um, uh, is our faith. That's our why, right? Like even if we're not cognizant of it, it is, right? If we use their framework, we're already practicing it, just not consciously, right? I want to make it conscious. So we're seeing it now. It's in the corporate space. The masjid space and the Muslim space has always been doing it, but it was not framed effectively. It wasn't conscious for the most part. At least that's my observation, right? I didn't really work 20 years ago, so I don't know what it was like. But that's been my observation when I talked to the legacy holders, the old guard, that there was just that inner desire, that thing that brought everyone together, but it wasn't really documented. It wasn't, it wasn't like marketed properly.
So you mentioned, I think something about the high burnout rate, or one of the there is a certain burnout rate when it comes to volunteers, and you also mentioned that when people take on leadership positions, whether it's paid or volunteering, you should take it as an amendment. And I think that that makes sense. I mean, any position you take, the first responsibility you have is not to your boss, it's to Allah, right?
Absolutely.
But we also see a high burnout rate, and there are many reasons for it. There are many solutions offered, but I want to get your take on it. What do you think causes this high burnout rate in volunteers, even in Muslim staff working at these institutions, and how do you solve this issue?
So there's two point of views here, like two people who since there's two parties, each person can do something about it, right? I'm wearing the leadership hat, so I can go from my point of view. But as an employee myself, there's that component too. As employees, and this is very hard to do in the Muslim space, I think it's because of like it's ingrained in our culture to be humble, right? And to put others first, which self-deprecation is different than being humble, right? Just an FYI to a lot of people, like it's not the same thing, and I'm guilty of that. Many people who do nonprofit work for Muslims have the same problem because certain industries that are giving industries tend to attract certain personalities, and those personalities have a certain way of thinking and behaving, right? That like prevents them to be able to, one, establish boundaries, which is the one thing I was going to say. Two, being able to like communicate without worrying about um hey, if I say this, it doesn't matter how the other person feels, because at the end of the day, this is a job, right? They're not going to take it personally, right? On the other side, which is my side, it's to create a safe space for people to be able to do that, right? Because we don't have a rule book on how to work in this space. We don't have like, hey, I'm hiring an office manager. This is the standard, industry standard job description, and this is the industry standard output that I expect from this role. Therefore, as long as you do this, you're good. We don't have that. What we actually have in reality, and this is the problem from the leadership's point of view, is we have a laundry list of things that we want to get done, and we're finding a person to try to get that done. And the gap there is, if this person comes in, like if they're a competent person and they know how to do the job, right, and they have experience doing it, and they come to you like, hey, I can realistically only do this much in a 2-week span or in a 1-month span, right? This is what we call project management. The leadership should be okay enough to be like, all right, cool, let's adjust our expectations accordingly. That's not what happens. From what I have seen and what I've heard from a lot of people that I work with, especially people that I'm coaching, they're telling me that their managers will be like, well, we hired you to do all this stuff, so then I think we should consider a pay cut. What? Like that's not how it works. So now what you have done is you have taught your person, your empathetic, passionate person, that their opinion, one, doesn't matter, that they're not safe because they're going to get a negative consequence for opening up and being vulnerable. So you've created an unsafe environment. And when you create an unsafe environment, people then choose to keep it in. And human beings do not like to keep things in. It manifests in different ways. One of them is you start feeling burnt out, right? You start feeling like, you know what? The walls are closing in. No one is listening to me, right? It's just too much work. No matter how hard I work at the end of the day, I can't even get rid of the mountain of work that's needed. And you might never will, especially if you're not planning and if you're not, road mapping properly, or if you're not using any project management methodologies. Yeah, it's just going to keep piling on because this brother has this opinion and this sister has that opinion, and there's no way to measure what does success look like for us, right? Now, I say all this to say, by the way, that not every organization is doing this. Actually, a lot, mashallah, there's been a significant growth in this space, right? In operations and project management and strategy. You're seeing it, like they're high performing Muslim nonprofits, high performing masajids, right? Who really understand that taking these corporate methodologies really help sustaining our talent, right? And if you include the Islamic values into your company culture, then you're just killing it, right? If you're able to do both, you're gonna kill it.
Jazakallah khair. That was I hadn't thought of that in terms of like a reason for burnout, but the way you explained it, I think, I mean, it really makes sense. And
Yeah.
one of the things, I guess this would be part of a strategic vision, and part of growth as well, is addressing these kind of issues. But talking about strategic vision, what are some of the key strategies that you've implemented to foster growth in organizations that you've led, particularly in communities that are either diverse or rapidly changing? What are some of the key strategies that you've implemented and seen that these strategies work and these strategies don't?
So on a basic level, one of the things that I really tried to do is make sure that we have a strategic plan, we have a mission, vision, and values, we're all aligned in the direction we're planning on heading long term. If we're not aligned, we have a problem. We need to stop doing everything else, because then me as an executive director or anyone, any employee, any board member, whoever comes and gets involved can hijack the trajectory of your organization, right? We need to be aligned first. After alignment is done, and this is usually one of the things I tend to do in the beginning, I tend to gauge and probe and really understand. There's always some mission and vision, some generic thing on the website. How many people know it? How many people know the values? How many people know where we're headed? What does it look like? What does it feel like, right? So first, strategic vision, mission, and strategic planning, and company values. Once we have that, then it's about fostering a sense of community. So the second part that you mentioned about the rapid growth and the diversity of a community, I'll hold off on that for now. Just talking about the strategies itself. Once we have the long-term plan, one of the things that I like to work on is operational plans, which are like the annual plans. The way that I do it is the OKR method, right? There's KPIs, there's SMART goals. I do OKRs with initiatives. So what that means is we have our organizational goals. Through that, I extract what that would look like successful, like what would that look like for us in this year, right? So those are my strategic objectives. Then from them, I have my key results. I have my, how can I measure it? What are the things I need to get done for it to actually be considered a success, right? And then I divide those up to all the stakeholders in my team. So right now at the mesh that I work at, I have a youth director, I have an imam, I have operation teams, I have program teams. I need to take these strategic objectives and I need to assign it to each person, right, each team, to be able to break it down and come up with how are they going to get there, right? Because they're the industry experts. I'm not, right? I don't know anything about, uh, religious jurisprudence, right? Like that's not my background. I leave that to the imam to decide, okay, you know what, based off of this organizational goal, these are things that we need to do to determine success. And based off of the things that we need to do, it will take me approximately this time, right? So once we've done that, then we even break it down even further. So we did 5 years, 3 to 5 years. Then we do the 1 year. The OKRs are the KRs usually can be quarterly. But then this is something I actually learned at IAR. I'll give a quick shout out to the facility maintenance committee there. The facility maintenance committee's vice chair is a scrum master, right? And I remember he was like hearing me talk about the challenges I was facing because I was following the old waterfall method, project management style, what I learned in school. And, I didn't have a tech background, so I didn't know what Scrum was or agile methodologies were. And then he explains it to me. He shows me his Jira dashboard and he's like, yeah, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing that. And for those of you who don't know, who are not from the Raleigh community, the facility maintenance committee, like they're I'm telling you, they are one of the most successful teams in that organization, right? And one of the reasons, remember we were talking about boundaries earlier? This is boundaries, right? Azim, the committee chair, he was able to then take all this mountain of work, prioritize it, create a backlog, come up with like 2-week sprints. It's like, okay, based off of your time, in your time, I know that you can, and it takes you roughly about this much time to do this much work, and this is urgent. We're going to prioritize these items. These items we're not going to touch. It may piss off some people, but not a single person has a bad thing to say about the people on that team. Why? Because they deliver. They're consistent. Why are they delivering? Why are they consistent? Because they got their boundaries in place. They know, they plan things out, they communicate proactively, and then they deliver on what they communicate on. And what I like also about agile methodologies is you can pivot very quickly, right? If things don't go according to plan. It actually works really well in the Muslim nonprofit space because the Muslim nonprofit space, in its essence, is a very volatile environment. It's quickly changing. All it takes is like one imam to move to an area for the whole community to change, right? Or one imam to leave for the whole community to change. All it takes is one social economic situation, one political situation to change the whole fabric of that community, right? So the agile methodology just made sense for me. So I started practicing it too. I got trained in it too. And that's how I divide up my day-to-day and my week to bi-weekly work.
So, kind of touching on that, do you think that the current framework that mosques and Islamic institutions are following today for, whether it's organization, strategy, growth, is this work enough for survival in the next 50 or 100 years? And if you don't think this is the current framework is the correct framework for survival, which framework do you think would work better, or what adjustments to this framework would work better?
So you mean like the way that masjids work right now?
Yeah. Yeah. So like that could be something like, how institutions are usually called Islamic centers rather than a mosque. So they in-house everything from youth activities to burials to almost every aspect of
Yeah.
the community.
Yeah. Um, someone that we both know, Imam Abu Talib, one of the things he used to tell me quite a bit, and he gave a khutbah on it too, was he used to talk about how the masjid serves the same services that 15 institutions across the country, across the globe would do. And there's so much truth behind that. If the masjid continues to do everything, then they're going to fall and fail. However, the masjid is the core of our identity in the United States. No one can deny that. It's the only thing that we can own as Muslims, right? It's the only institution that we have, that we can say is ours. So it needs to be the nucleus, right? But it can't be everything. So I think we're seeing a transition, right? Because we're starting to see the phase 4 of the masjid life cycle. So just to quickly summarize what those are, I define the phases by where they are in terms of capacity, finances, and then like culturally and other metrics like what's going on, right? So you have the sapling, you have the masjid that is very needs based, very security based, very like there's something that has united a small group of the community. Like we need to start a masjid, and this is usually they start off in the renting out spaces, renting out halls and back rooms and people's homes, right? And they raise money. Then they kind of you will probably have like no employees, right? At this point. Then they eventually get into phase 2. Phase 2 is when they have they have their bylaws and charters. They probably have an imam at this point, or they're securing one. They probably have close to 100 to 3 or 500 people who come to like their Jama'ah. No, I would say like 2 to 3. And they probably are in the process of securing or have secured their building, right? So they have a few employees, not too big, right? Not too small. Then we have now the sapling is becoming a tree. So it needs to go into, the ground, and it's going to become a tree now. That is phase 3. Phase 3 is what we call, like at the end of it, what we call is the mega masjids, the legacy holders, the masjids who have approximately have been running for 30 years. And in some cases, not so, because they had the funding to like invest very quickly, right? And start something really big. Their capacities are like their Jumas are getting full. Their spaces are getting full. They have quite a bit of employees at this point. They are starting waqfs and endowments and thinking about long-term strategy and stuff like that. And recently, we have started seeing the conversations and some people trying to execute the phase 4, the fruits falling and starting other trees, right? Phase 4 is the masjids who are thinking about having businesses around them. They're purchasing land, or they have at this point properties that they invest in, that they're able to put in their waqf, that gives them a high ROI. They're starting credit unions. They are thinking like the city. I don't know if you saw the announcement in one of the masjids in Dallas where they talked about the city, right? I don't remember the name of the masjid, so I'm just not saying the name. I don't want to offend anyone there. There's a big community.
I remember it was like something about like they were gonna have, if I remember correctly, it was like shopping centers, universities,
Oh yeah.
hotels,
Oh yeah.
and even like a court system, I
Oh yeah.
think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, I remember when I saw that video, I saw the YouTube video when it went out, and I was pumped, man, because that if we start thinking along those lines, we will go far.
So just to
right?
clarify, that's like phase 4 of
That
the
is
skill.
that is like that is phase 4 now. We are going like phase 4 is building up to that, right? So very few masjids are at the point where they can have this conversation, right? Very few. I would say like I can count them in probably one hand, right? In the whole country that can actually like start practically plan for this, right? And so this is new waters in the United States. We have not seen this before. We're gonna, there's gonna be a lot of mistakes that are made, um, but it's through these experiences that we're going to see. So I think if we go with that model, where the masjid now has enough capital built and the community is so strong that now entrepreneurs want to invest in the masjid, people want to work for the masjid, people want to live next to the masjid, right? And then they have enough resources to be able to push around, right, local politicians and stuff to get some codes and stuff across, right? They're able to start thinking about long-term investment and what that looks like, right? They're able to offer loans to like Muslim entrepreneurs and stuff like that. When we start thinking along these lines and we start thinking about dividing up the responsibility of what that community looks like, then yes, I think we're gonna make it far. So I have hope. I do have hope. But the thing is, there's very few people who are thinking like that, and we're still discussing, what's the role of the masjid, what's the role of this, what's the role of that, right? The masjid needs to be the nucleus. It's the anchor that keeps the Muslim community together. um, I don't have the religious prowess to explain the importance of the masjid, but even as someone like myself, I know that that's our anchor. I know that that's what we own. um, so it needs to be what fuels the roots, right? Because I mentioned all these phases, right? But I never mentioned the roots. The roots is your mission, vision, values. Your mission, vision, values need to really represent your community, right? It needs to represent your faith effectively, because that is what's going to galvanize everything, right? That's what's going to make you an apple fruit versus apple tree versus a lemon tree versus an orange tree, right? I think lemons are in trees, right? No, they are. So yeah.
I'm gonna Google this after this podcast.
So that's what I would say. If we think along those lines, I think we're in a good place, but we have a long way to go. Um, like there's no rule book, so we're all making mistakes as we go, but make mistakes fast, right? We're already behind. Our communities are in dire need of institutions. Um, like it's embarrassing, like how little, despite being such a such a big community in the United States, that we're not able we have a hard time making change happen. You know, local, forget about national or international issues. And we could think of a whole lot there. But even just local issues with your township and stuff like that, right? Like people are starting to get smart and realizing, oh, we can come together and talk to our elected leaders and get Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr as official holidays, right? Like these are things that are happening now in major masjid areas. But how many of those states are really like that, right? It's like we have 50 what states, right? So we have a long way to go, basically.
So touching on that, right, where do you see, for instance, in the maybe the past 15, 20 years or so, we've been hearing these ideas of third spaces, right? As you said, the masjid is the nucleus. But where do you see these third spaces operating within the Muslim dynamic or Muslim fabric, or the Muslim community fabric?
One of the things that I have a hard time understanding, and it's probably because of the lack of my own, just being ignorant, maybe, right? And just being human. I get surprised by how cannibalistic the Muslim community can be at times, right? Third spaces, the challenge that third spaces face is them being able to define what they are, right? The community, for better or worse, has already defined what the masjid is. That definition actually pushes a lot of Muslims away because they had a bad experience with that definition. They don't believe in the definition, and then they just kind of go away, right? The third space, socially, I'm not going to speak about religion right now, but socially does not have the emotional baggage masjids have. So they have a lot more room to work with, to push the boundaries and stuff like that. But a funnel that doesn't have an anchor is just sucking you in and throwing you out somewhere else. You get what I'm saying? It needs to bring you in to into the core of the community, right? If you have a wider net, think strategically. Work with institutions that don't, right? Like if we did like a let's think about like a strategy game for a second, right? You're playing whatever game, you have like the core thing that needs to be fueled up, and you have like all these little things that are just like hovering around. But because the core thing has a very small stretch, like influence space, it can't go far. But then you have these drone-like things that are hovering around that have more reach further, right? They can pull things to them, but they just pull them there. They're still hovering around. They need to get anchored somewhere. There needs to be a way to pull that back into the core of the community, right? Which is the masjid today, right? And it should be the masjid. It's just like, what does the masjid look like then in the future, right? That becomes the conversation. When we define masjid, what are we talking about? The prayer space, like, so it becomes a little complicated. My opinion. You asked me what my opinion is of third spaces. I would say that third spaces have a lot of opportunity to bring Muslims to the masjid. Third spaces have the opportunity to do a lot of good if they're anchored with good, right? But if their mission becomes, we're going to be everything the masjid is not, you're doomed to fail. I'm going to give you a non-Muslim example of this. Simon Sinek used to talk about comparing Microsoft and Apple all the time. One of the things he used to talk about is when he's talking to the Microsoft executives, he would talk about what he would hear how they're saying, this is going to be the next iPhone, this is going to be the next Apple, this is going to be the next this. Your success is someone else has already accomplished, right? But when they talk to the Apple executives, like, cool, we're just trying to just be better. We're just trying to be the greatest, right? So I have seen third spaces when I talk to the people who go there that they're talking about, this is a place for people who don't like going to the masjid. Dangerous. Don't say that. Like it's a place for it has a wider net, sure, but I wouldn't encourage that kind of language or that kind of rhetoric, at least from the leadership. The people who are going can say that. That's fine. That's the spiritual state that they're in. I've been in that state too. I understand how dark it can be and how isolating it can be, but I found my way back. It took me some time, right? You're also promoting through this a consumer mindset versus a contributing mindset. The message is our space, and if it's truly our space, then shouldn't we want to fix it? The problems that you see in your life, like the solution is you are the one who can actively contribute to it. But if you choose to abandon and go somewhere else, you're choosing to be a consumer. And if we continue to do that, then I don't know. I'm very worried about the future of our community then.
I know there's so many more topics we have to talk about. I mean, while we have you here, but I know time is running short. So before we do end, I do want to touch on this. You started a new page on YouTube, on Instagram, and other social media platforms, Growing with Danyal. And on this page, I mean, it's kind of like what we're doing on this podcast, but continuous. Is that a good way to summarize your page?
Yeah, so I've been doing this work for 8 years now professionally, and longer if I don't count like professional work. And there's been many times where I kind of just like ready to throw in the towel or run away, right? And subhanAllah, every time I try to run away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throws me in deeper. And so tawakkul obviously is something I had a hard time
I
during
think
my
at
youth.
this point you need to just learn your lesson. Like,
Yeah,
you're staying in.
So recently, like not recently, but alhamdulillah, I've kind of come to the conclusion that, what, I think it's time to just lean in. I have a specific set of skills. I have certain experiences, and I just genuinely have a desire to provide safe spaces, help people grow. And I realize part of helping people grow is the institutions and resources. I have a social work background. I'm always thinking about all these different influences that make up the human experience. one of that is a sense of community. And if we don't have a sense of community, we don't have a strong community that can officially really represent us, then we're in trouble. Because then as a therapist or as a coach or as someone who's working direct intervention work, I am limited to the resources I can offer to my community. And that's been the case. I sometimes get embarrassed to recommend Muslims to go to certain institutions because I'm like, man, what if they have a bad experience? What if, like, so while I'm able to, I decided, you know what, I'm going to just start synthesizing this information. I'm going to connect with other people who are doing this work. And I want to just make that information accessible, make it more digestible, make it more relevant, right? When I'm talking about strategic plans, where I'm talking about community issues, or I'm talking about human behavior in the social environment, what does that mean to like the common person, right? So I'm trying to, what I want to do is I just want to synthesize that information, make it available to the Muslim community, and hopefully just be able to give another toolkit for people, right? Like one of the things that I say is subscribe to this channel. Let this be another tool to add to your toolkit. Just live holistically, right? And if I'm able to do that for a handful of people, and if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, because I feel like I don't have any other choice. Like this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for me at this point, because I've tried to get away from it, right? I keep getting pulled in. Then at a certain point, I'm realizing that it's an honor to be able to be that for people. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. And this is, I mean, I think personally, I think it's a great initiative. But even I think one of the aspects that I derive from this conversation is we still have a lot of work to do. I mean, we're just talking about definitions of what a masjid means, right? Of what other organizations mean, and how do we fit everything into this into this Muslim fabric. I keep saying dynamic Muslim fabric, right? And maybe synthesizing this information, sharing it with everyday people, gets that conversation moving forward, right? So those same people can take it to their masajid, to their institutions, or at least start thinking about it, and hopefully push the needle a little bit forward. So I think, I mean, it's kind of like a shout out for. And what was the handle page? Go ahead and share that too, just so people can find it. Yeah.
It's growing with Danyal on Instagram and on YouTube, and
Okay.
it's fairly new, but inshallah I'll be working on having a website on there too soon too.
Inshallah. And so just kind of winding down, there I want to ask, actually, let me do one more question. I know we're over time, but let me do one more question, then we'll wind it down. Looking ahead, what is your vision for the future of Islamic leadership in the US? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind for the future leaders?
I don't really have any aspirations there. Like I don't know if that's a terrible thing to say. I I
You're
want
basically
to.
saying we're doomed, so.
No. Like about legacy, right? I just want to, like, I just, if when the time comes and I pass away, I just want to be remembered as someone who was kind, who was always there when someone needed help, and who just genuinely cared, right? That's all. That's all. That would be like my legacy, right? There's I think his name's Sami Hamdi, right? The speaker who he did in the ICNA convention. He did this exercise. He did this exercise in the ICNA convention where he talks about, you know, he thinks about when he passes away, you know, that he's gonna be walking in Jannah, and inshallah that he will see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he will have a conversation about them. And at that time, he thinks that he might not be able to say that he was there during the time when Masjid al-Aqsa was liberated. But then right after he says something, because he's embarrassed not to say anything, someone else would come and be like, hey, because of you, like I was able to, this happened. When I was hearing that, I just got so emotional, and I'm just getting emotional like thinking about it too, because like like I said, I had no aspirations for like community work. I care about people, and just because I care about people, I want to build institutions that serve them. I'm hoping that I'm in that situation and someone can be like, hey, if it's because of you that I kept working as the imam, I was about to quit and you helped, is because of the work that you did, that I was able to provide for my family. And like, it was because of you that I felt like, we had a shot, and we built this we built that institution that you talked about, with the courthouse and the businesses and the halakas happening at the picnic tables and the adhan and the loudspeaker, and non-Muslims coming and having a space at the masjid to sit and watch people pray, and us breaking iftar together during the month of Ramadan, and kids running around and the old people yelling at them, but it's all endearment and love, right? And mayors and politicians coming, not out of respect to the masjid because of how strong we are. And then there's me there somewhere with my illustrations, my children's books that I want to draw, and kids just like listening. That's like, if I could, inshallah, Mela.
I mean, that's sadaqah jariyah, right?
Yeah.
That is the definition. That
Yeah.
what you want to leave behind is this. I mean, I don't know if you want to call it inspiration, but sometimes we, even in the story of like Musa alayhi salam, right, where he freed the children of Israel, right, and as he was walking with the Beni of Israel, he goes through all these, escapes Pharaoh, the Red Sea event where the sea splits and all these miracles, but he never ended up going to the Holy Land, right, to Beit al-Maqdis. He never went there. He actually died outside of Jerusalem. And so that shows that sometimes you work for something so hard, but you might not be able to see it in this world. But your children and your children's children will get to experience and enjoy it. And at the end of the day, the true enjoyment is in the afterlife anyways, right? So I do pray that, inshallah, people run up to you and go like, hey, Danyal, remember that one podcast with that weird guy that you had? I listened to that, and it inspired me to become this great leader that really pushed forward Islamic institutions and Islam in the West. So going kind of down from such a emotional question, how do you unwind after a long day? Is it anime? Is it playing video games? Is it reading a book?
I love anime. Alhamdulillah. Lately though, because I have kids now and I'm very busy, my unwinding time has to incorporate my children. So one of the things that I love to do is go for hikes, and we usually like collect sticks outside and rocks, and then if we find a lake, we'll usually toss the rocks in the lake. And if it's a river, we'll try to see if we could go in the shallow ends and just sit there and just have a great time. So that's been my most that's been my recent like unwinding thing. It's just going out there in nature and just grounding myself and having a great time with the boys.
MashaAllah. May Allah bless them, and may Allah raise them to be leaders just like their father. Ameen. But Jazakallah khair, Brother Danyal, for joining us today. And there's a ton of questions that we could explore together. You could give insight on, but unfortunately, people probably stopped listening to this podcast 25-30 minutes in because of attention span that we have as humans.
The technical difficulties.
No, it's attention span, right? I mean, I wish we could go for 2-3 hours, but inshallah, I hope we can get you back so we can talk about these important conversations, because one aspect of it is preserving Islam through the knowledge, but there's also aspects of it through structure, right? Like, how do you build Muslim communities? And that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. He provided the religious knowledge, but he also built the structures that pushed the Muslim community forward. And so inshallah, I hope we can get you back, and barakallahu feek for your time. I know it's late, so I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Jazakallah khair. May Allah bless you.
Jazakallah khair, Marcin. May Allah accept you, all the work that you do too. You have a whole resume yourself, and may Allah reward all the work that Mishkah is doing as well.
آمين آمين. All right. بارك الله فيكم. الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام.